Now, President Donald Trump started off Friday uh, after a disastrous week by blaming former President Barack Obama and the CDC for some of his response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, the president accused Obama of bungling the response to H1N1, remember swine flu, back in 2009, and complained that he had made changes to the CDC that stopped Trump's response to COVID-19. Well, what is the Trump response, right? Basically, to call it fake news and to downplay it as much as possible. Now, Trump tweeted this out. He said, "For decades, the CDC looked at and studied its testing system, but did nothing about it. It would always be inadequate and slow for large-scale pandemic, but a pandemic would never happen, they hoped. President Obama made changes that only complicated things further." Notice, I believe that this is all projection, right? That looks like projection to me. Uh, it would always be inadequate. So don't blame me because it was Obama and they hoped that it was that they were not gonna have a pandemic. No, you were hoping there wasn't gonna be a pandemic. And then when it happened, you're like, we got to protect the markets. I got to protect the markets. Got to protect the markets. That is the number one thing that we have to look out for. This is the number one thing you have to do. Why? Because if the markets go down, then I don't have a case for reelection because I've literally done nothing else but give rich people more and more money. So again, understand total projection. But then he goes into lies about the response to swine flu. He said their response to the H1N1 swine flu was a full-scale disaster with thousands dying. Just about over 1,000 people died, roughly from H1N1 in America, by the way. So there's no thousands of people, right? No. Okay. He also says, and nothing meaningful done to fix the testing problem until now. The changes have been made in testing will soon be happening on a very large scale basis. All red tape has been cut. Ready to go. What a dangerous liar. But it all comes down to this, right? What about me? Don't blame me. Don't blame me. You can't blame me at all. No, it's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. No, it's all those guys. Obama, his fault. I'm the one that actually is doing fantastic. And I am fixing Obama's problems because Obama is terrible. No, here are the actual facts, right? So look, Obama's response to H1N1 and later on Ebola was actually pretty good and didn't touch off the kind of panic that we're seeing right now today. Of course, there was a little bit of panic. There always is a little bit of panic, but right now it's way worse than I remember during H1N1 and especially Ebola because I remember covering the Ebola crisis. So now, what happened? What was this response? Well, Obama's acting director of Health and Human Services declared H1N1 a public health emergency on April 26, 2009. That was only when 20 cases of H1N1 were reported in the country, had been confirmed. There were no deaths with swine flu at that time. Still, public health emergency. Okay, now, more. 2 days later, the administration decided that it would make an initial funding request to H1N1 for Congress. So that was April 28th, 2009. Now, they got $7.65 billion allocated for a vaccine and other measures. Now, notice the timing on here. This is very important, the dates, right? H1N1 was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization on June 11th, 2009, meaning that the Obama administration took preventative measures and actions at least 2 months prior to it being declared a pandemic. Now, that's very important, right? So you had this measured response already. Okay, let's get ahead of this thing, says the Obama administration. Let's get some funding. Let's get some research into a vaccine. Let's do some containment measures. Let's get this thing figured out before it really starts to spread all over the country. And very importantly, let's get testing, right? Let's make sure we've got testing kits for everybody so that we can really, prevent this from, look, freaking out the markets. Look, if you're a president, you obviously don't want to freak out the markets. And so what happened? You took a very measured response. Not only that, but I also do believe that President Obama, unlike Donald Trump, cares about regular citizens and the stock market. And so you don't have that with Donald Trump. His entire focus is on markets, protecting myself. Okay. So now, the Obama administration, as I said, they declared a public health emergency more than 6 weeks before the pandemic designation. That's also important too. Now, on October 24th, 2009, 6 months after his administration declared it a public health emergency, Obama declared it a national emergency. And at that point, H1N1 had killed more than 1,000 American lives, according to the CDC. And when Obama made that declaration, the New York Times reported that thousands of people were lining up in cities across the country to receive vaccinations because, again, that preparedness, right? Federal officials acknowledged that their vaccination program had gotten off to a slow start, with some states having requested 10 times the amounts that they had been allotted. And so, look, there were issues, right? Small issues. But when we look at what's happening now, with it being a global pandemic, we're still about a year away from a vaccine because we didn't start preparing for this. We were completely unprepared. And now, just today, President Trump is declaring this a national emergency. I mean, look, terrible response, right? So now Trump declared COVID-19 a public health emergency on January 31st, right? Also prior to any deaths in the United States. Any U.S. citizens who had been to China's Hubei province, the source of the outbreak, in the previous 14 days were subjected to 14 days of mandatory quarantine if they travel back to the United States. Now that is good. That's not bad, right? It is a response. But obviously not a great response. Not as much as Obama had done. And besides, Obama's response had prevented a massive spread of H1N1, as well as, of course, could be expected in a pandemic. Millions of people did end up being positive for swine flu, but we had testing measures and we had vaccines that were made available at the time that it was really declared a pandemic, and not so long after. But now we're in a completely different situation. President Trump has bungled it in almost every way possible. And it's amazing, right? But of course, look, that's what Donald Trump's biggest record is. And he might be remembered for this more than anything, of how he bungled this entire thing, his record of complete and total incompetence. And so we have a pandemic. We don't even know how many people are infected, by the way. We don't have testing, right? Only rich people right now can seem to get testing kits. And again, you have a vaccine that's at least a year away. I only wish Donald Trump had responded half as good as the way of Obama had. But with Trump, again, and this is what we warned you about, the incompetence. Trump's an evil person. We know that. But it's not his evilness that was the worst part. No, it was evil plus incompetent. He cannot manage his way out of a paper bag. And when you are facing a pandemic health crisis, as we are now, it would be nice to have someone who could actually be and step in and be a manager. And so, look, one of the reasons that the response was so bad as well is that we didn't have the things in place that we did back when there was Ebola and swine flu. For example, Trump fired the entire pandemic response team 2 years ago, back in 2018. And then they decided not to replace him. This was Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer, who departed from his post leading the Global Health Security Team on the National Security Council back in May of 2018. This was amid a reorganization of the council by John Bolton. Zymer's team was disbanded at the time. So not just Trump, it's the Trump administration. John Bolton. Congratulations, John Bolton. Tom Bossert, who the Washington Post reported had called for a comprehensive biodefense strategy against pandemics and biological attacks, had also been fired the previous month. So no team. Not only that, but Trump had also cut the funding for the CDC, forcing the CDC to cancel its effort to help countries prevent infectious disease threats from becoming epidemic in 39 of 49 countries in 2018. You know what country was among those that abandoned their response? China. In the spring of 2018, the White House pushed Congress to cut funding for Obama-era disease security programs, proposing to eliminate $252 million in previously committed resources for the rebuilding of health systems in Ebola-ravaged Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. Under fire from both sides, President Trump dropped the proposal to eliminate Ebola funds a month later, but other White House efforts included reducing $15 billion in national health spending and cutting the global disease-fighting operational budgets of the CDC, the NSC, DHS, and HHS, and the government's $30 million complex crisis fund had been eliminated. Why? Why did they go through all of these cuts? In order to pay for tax cuts for the rich. We gave $1.9 trillion to the rich and corporations. Look, these tax cuts mainly, for the most part, went to the rich and corporations, the lion's share. And so, well, of course, they had to cut the CDC budget. Well, of course, they had to fire these teams. We don't need those. We're not going to have a pandemic. What are you talking about? Oh, no, that doesn't happen here. Cut taxes. Let's cut taxes for the rich. That's why we're in the situation that we're in. That's why we don't have experts that are currently there trying to do something about this. Now that's why everybody's running around as if their head's cut off. It's complete and utter madness. And that's why everybody's in a panic, man. I mean, look, it's so rich to blame Obama for this. He's been in office for 3 years. This is your fault. But understand, this is what Trump does. He blames people. He can never take any sort of personal responsibility. I thought conservatives cared about personal responsibility. Trump didn't cause COVID-19, but his response to this, absolutely abysmal. He put out fake news, downplayed the seriousness of the issue, and more importantly, didn't allow the government to put forth the resources and the plans to mitigate the spread of this. I mean, the very basic things that you're supposed to do, Trump didn't do them. And now people will unfortunately lose their lives unnecessarily because of Trump's complete and total, utter incompetence and complete refusal to be a leader on this issue. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.